So I've been fascinated by GLP-1s, Ozempic and the like, and the impact they're having on culture. And I specifically think that there's some insight we can gain into how fundraising and generosity is developing within churches. So a brief overview of what a GLP-1 is, okay? Ozempic is probably what everybody knows it as. In the 90s, a doctor named Eng was studying the venom of a Gila monster because he believed that because the Gila monster could exist on 3 meals a year, that there was something in its venom that could help diabetics, because he genuinely wanted to help diabetics regulate their blood glucose better. So started studying, come to find out there was this receptor in there that goes into the gut that we call GLP-1s after they were synthesized down. Right? And in doing so, it regulates the gut itself. Now, there are all manner of things we could talk about with it, but what they discovered was that not only did it help drastically regulate the blood glucose of diabetics, it was also causing substantive weight loss in everyone that was taking it. Like the only comparison they had with it was like bariatric surgery, like the gastric bypass. Like it was that kind of weight loss when you were on these drugs, and it was simply just an injection. And so we're in the States, there's an obesity crisis, right? And so if you have a drug that can dramatically reduce the obesity with just an injection, that mug gonna sell like crazy. And so once it passed clinical trials, they proceeded to give it out to everyone. And this is where it gets really interesting, okay? This is the most interesting part to me. Of course, did it regulate diabetics' blood sugar? Of course, did obesity tank in the people that were taking it in ways we hadn't seen on anything really other than surgery. But what was reported back beyond the weight loss is unbelievably interesting to me. So, if you didn't know, when you're on GLP-1s, all of your other, let's call them dopamine-seeking activities that are unhealthy for you proceed to stop or limit, i.e., people who are on Ozempic just stopped gambling. They were like reporting not gambling anymore. People on Ozempic report just spending more time with their families and less time on their phones. They reported obviously wanting to eat healthier, because that's the thing. It not only was it reducing the amount of food you were eating, you actually decided that you wanted to eat healthier food on top of that. Reported working out more. They reported less risky behaviors. And then this one really got me when it made me start thinking about how it helps us and affects us, is that 35+% of people on GLP-1s reported spending less money. And not like less money on food because they're less hungry, but like less Amazon shopping. Less shopping that we would call it, say, just to make us feel good, right? Like the shopping that they talked about on Parks and Rec, right? Treat yourself shopping, like less treat yourself shopping. There's a doctor named F. Perry Wilson who is been studying the effects of GLP-1s on people and the impact that it's having. And he wrote this about some of the recent findings. He said, these drugs seem to be the anti-consumption agents. Not just for food, for drugs, for cigarettes, for risky behaviors. They are essentially the antidote to the central issue of our time, which is overconsumption. This reminded me of a book I read a couple years back called The Age of Addiction by a doctor named Courtwright out of the University of Central Florida. He stated that while we've always had vice and addictive substances within our culture, that's just been who we have been, we've now taken the mechanisms by which we used to sell addiction in a very small subset, such as drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, that kind of thing, and taken those practices into everyday items. He says that we use the language of vice. We use the mechanisms that trigger dopamine in our brains at a high rate to get us addicted just to sell everyday items. He calls this limbic capitalism. And he basically goes on to say that to exist in the American culture or the Western culture is to fight addiction every single day of your life. Now that is wild to me. And as I read it, it honestly rang true in so many areas that I find myself trying to help people, not only in my own community, but within the churches that we work with. That one of the problems we're facing within our churches, within the places that we lead, is not simply lack of information, but it's addiction. Like looking at the research we're seeing coming out of what GLP-1s are doing, looking at the research that people like Dr. Courtwright are doing, it became clear to me that not only are we trying to get people to be generous, but we're also battling the addiction in their lives. I mean, think about the thing you just said. 35% of people just stopped spending money when they got on GLP-1s. And so this changes our approach, I think, in many ways when we talk about generosity and developing that culture within our church. Because addicts have all the information that they need. Like every addict I've ever known and ever loved knows what they're doing is bad for them. Like every one of them. The problem that they run into is that they can't seem to stop themselves. So how do we combat that? Like I'm not suggesting that we pass out Ozempic on Sunday mornings. I don't think that's the way to go forward. But how do addicts beat addiction? And like we all know this, like the number one way that addicts beat addiction is not through yelling at them, it's through hope and community. Like the research has come out that community is the primary mechanism by which we beat addiction. It's the reason, one of the main reasons that things like AA and NA work so well. So how does this apply to how we think about generosity in our churches and the places that we lead? Perhaps one of the ways, if you're thinking about a capital campaign or preaching a sermon series or just thinking through how to communicate about generosity in your space, in your church. To do that and not offer community for people to beat the addiction of overconsumption in their life is like trying to walk uphill, man. Like we've got to offer the spaces for people to beat the consumption addiction they live with. In addition to developing generosity, in addition to teaching them the wonderful ways that God has for them, in addition to walking through what life transformation looked like, we must begin to address the addictive behaviors that honestly we're all living under. I mean, I feel this, you feel this. Every single day of our lives, we're fighting not buying something on Amazon. Like, we're fighting not going down the street and just buying the hamburger instead of eating the food we have in our house. Every single day of our lives, we're all fighting addiction. And the way we combat the addiction of consumption is through a life-giving community. Honestly, this is why I think that the church is the hope of the world. Particularly right now, when we are all quietly battling levels of addiction, what we need in our life is a life-giving community where there is no shame but just hope. And we have that. So this is what I think we should do if I was going to give like next steps of how to apply this. Because, I'm a pastor, we always have next steps for things. As you're thinking through what the fall is going to look like, odds are you've got financial sermon series you're thinking through or thinking through small groups for this fall, whatever. You should absolutely be thinking through how do we get a level of community centered around the idea of breaking the addiction of consumption. What does that look like for a community? Offering that as a space for people to actually begin to address the things in their lives.